Hi, my name's Andrew McLaren, and I've tutored a lot for AP Chemistry and Physics, and I see a lot of the same mistakes. And I have a really common tip that I've given to a lot of students, and it's really helped. Like, they've all been like, wow, I can't believe I was doing it that way. And it's basically just labeling as much as you can and not keeping it all in your head. Because the more you can write down, the better it is for your brain. So label all the parts, be specific, like break the problem down into parts and label it. If you can do that, these problems become so much easier. So write down like what you know, essentially. And these problems are really complex. So like in chemistry, there's oftentimes different substances, but maybe it's the same variable, like moles or grams. Or maybe it's the same substance, but you're going from like liters to moles or something like that using an equation. So oftentimes there's this, like different variables of the same thing. So you want to make sure you know what the number is that you're writing down. And a lot of students will just write down the unit, but that isn't quite enough. And I'll show you what I do. And then for physics, it's the same sort of idea. There's a lot of the similar looking things for similar parts to the problem, but they're related, and you need to know what number comes from where. Otherwise, you're going to grab the wrong number when you're trying to do another part of the problem. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So we'll start with a couple examples from chemistry. This is a really common type of question where they've given you a couple chemicals, and they want to have you compare like a couple different trials for a limiting reactant problem. And it's really important that you label what these different trials are because people will get really confused about which one actually is the limiting reactant. So I put like used here for all of these things, saying like, okay, this is like, imagine this is like trial one and you've used this is how much is produced, right? And so I know not only what the grams are of the substance, but how it's relevant to the problem. So there's a couple things that you can do like that. This isn't using a subscript, but it is labeling your parts with units and it's pretty clear. And then here I've got like a slightly different label for the one that actually was the limiting reactant. So I can see like, okay, that was actually the thing that was limiting. And you could also see how I like to use colors to label these things as well with my interactive whiteboard. It's pretty useful for breaking things down and having those different labels. So like in addition to that, sometimes it really helps to have something drawn out. Like there was a problem that I did with this student where we were it was one of these long ones where you're doing like the heat needed to change water from some temperature to another temperature. And that's really useful to have all these different Qs labeled. So I like to designate them as like Q1 through 5. And then I can calculate for those numbers. And I've even done a little bit of light color coordination here and there to show how big the numbers are. It helps a fair amount, in my opinion. So you can see how I also do a similar thing with physics with colors for different parts of the problem. I really like doing different colors for different like forces that you can then break down into their components. And I really like using subscripts where I've got like fx, fy, or ft and fx. Like I don't use tension. Like there's a lot of things where they'll use like forces where it's like a t, or like force normal is a big N, or weight like FG is a W. I never do that. That's something that like actually kind of upsets me when I have students write in that. I oftentimes will correct them and be like, don't write FT, or don't write T, write FT, like this, like FTY. And this is in the FY direction. And in this case, FG was just in the Y direction, but you might do like FGY if you're on a slope. See right here, they had W, I think, in that problem for the force of gravity. So I always keep the same letter for a variable, and then I'll put subscripts to let me know which part I'm dealing with. In addition, I never rearrange this equation. I always have the sum and the different components, and then the components may have a positive or negative sign on them, showing that that's either in the negative direction, in this case FG is down, or in the positive direction, and in this case it looks like the tension component in the y direction is going up, and the force normal is also going up. And so you can kind of figure these out and label them and relate each other, but you have to have really good labels. And that includes also putting signs on your numbers when you're doing these physics problems. The most common mistake is trying to do too much in your head and plugging in the wrong number. Usually, if you do some sort of drawn model or you estimate, you can figure out that these mistakes just don't make sense. But you need to really think about this and have it like drawn out. And I'll show you an example with trig for this. So you can see in this problem that they've given you an angle that's a little bit different than what they usually give you. You're probably used to problems where they give you the angle relative to the x-axis, but sometimes they give it to you relative to the y. And so you're going to need to either use the 60 degrees that goes here, because 30 plus 60 equals 90, right? So you're either going to need to figure out the angle and use that triangle you're familiar with, or you're going to need to draw out this other triangle. That's kind of like a second option. And you just need to use like sine or cosine depending on if you're using the 60 or the 30. And in addition to that, how I like to do this is I will write out like the trig function and the a and the o or whatever, and then below or right next to it, I'll write out the actual math problem and see if this seems reasonable compared to that given what value I get from the angle with the trig function. So if you have some context, you can double check these numbers and then ask yourself, hey, does 50 seem like a reasonable length right here, given that this is a 60-degree angle and this is 30 right here. And so you can do a little bit of double checking using that. But you have to have a good drawing of the trig, and I would definitely recommend doing this as well. Most of my students don't do that, and now they do because they've found that it's worth slowing down to catch those mistakes, just taking like 10% longer and getting like half as many mistakes is worth it. So, yeah, hope that was helpful. Thank you for McLearning with me. Before you go, please check out the following services that I offer with my business. So if you click the link in my videos, this goes to my website. I might be changing it from Podia because I'm no longer doing the interactive videos for sale. I might put those up for free. But most of my other services are linked here. So you can see that I've got like a Teachers Pay Teachers and a Wyzant. The Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of my assessments that I have for like the NGSS, as well as lessons that I made when I was actually a teacher in the classroom. So I've got quite a few things like CERs and other things on there. If you want to get one-on-one live support from me, either like with science or like working on like teaching support lessons and that kind of stuff, you can sign up through Wyzant. I have a link to there where you can contact me there, and we can schedule hourly appointments. And I've got a few other things on here like a Facebook page and other social media. And if you're interested in getting professional development with me for like a team of teachers, a whole page with information on that. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Thank you.